Admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of vampire stories, but after watching the first few episodes of the case study of Vanitas, I became instantly sold in this series. But this is my review of the series. It ran for 12 episodes in the summer 2021 anime season, and it will have a second season premiering in January 2022, so let's jump into it. At face value, the case study of Vanitas has a great group behind it. It's being done by Studio Bones. The director is Tomoyuki Itamura, who did the Monogatari series. The series composition was done by Hitomi Ueno, who has done a lot of really fantastic series, including The Snow White with Red Hair, Amanchu, Flying Witch, and Noragami. The music was done by Yuki Kajiura, who is obviously known for doing a lot of the Type Moon series, including the Fate series. And the creator, Jun Mochizuki, has been known for doing Pandora Hearts. So if that team itself doesn't get you excited, let's jump into more of this series. Starting with a little bit of history of the case study of Vanitas, it takes place in a world where there is vampires and humans, and at some point in its history, there was a war between the humans and the vampires. And after this war, there was kind of a separation that was made, where the vampires live in like an alternate Paris that is beyond this barrier. The humans live pretty much peacefully in the actual Paris itself. And also within this world, there is this tale of this Vanitas, this vampire that was born under the blue moon, whereas typically most vampires are born under the crimson moon. And this Vanitas was kind of outcast by the vampires themselves, and while being outcast, this vampire created this tome that would allow him to basically curse the vampires. And he kind of sought revenge against the vampires themselves. As we jump to the current time, we follow a vampire named Noe. And at some point, this vampire is attacked by another vampire who is known as what they call a curse bearer, which a curse bearer is a vampire who's had their actual true name corrupted, and it makes them unable to control themselves. They become what we would normally know as a vampire, a person that basically runs around and sucks the blood of people. Typically in this world, it's kind of shunned upon vampires to go out and just attack humans. But as he's being attacked, this human appears out of nowhere, bearing the name Vanitas and carrying the book of Vanitas himself. And even though you think he's going to use this book to harm the vampires, he actually uses the book to cure this curse bearer of this infliction, and thus recovering her true name. And as we find out, this vampire Noe was actually looking for this book itself, not to get the book, but he was told by his master to basically observe him. And so he basically follows Vanitas as he goes around and cures the vampires, as it seems like he has some sort of obsession with, even though the vampires don't want it, he is going to save the vampires. And thus begins this pairing of Noe, a vampire, with Vanitas, a human, going about kind of solving cases and, in effect, curing some vampires of the curse bearer infliction. And as the story goes on, you kind of learn more about the curse bearers. You learn about the Charlatan Parade, which is basically this group that seems to be causing the curse bearers. You get more into the political structures of both the human side and the vampire side, the kind of, I guess, agreements that both sides seem to have in order to create almost a peace between the two of them. And additionally, a lot of the backstory behind Noe and Vanitas himself. So why is this show so fantastic? And I think a lot of that really has to do with the chemistry. This show almost has, the best way that I can explain it is almost like a buddy cop drama type of chemistry between both Noe and Vanitas. They almost always seem like they're at each other's throats, like they hate each other. But it always kind of comes around to the idea that Noe is fascinated by Vanitas, and Vanitas needs Noe and is also fascinated by him. There's all these kind of integral moments between the two of them that almost kind of creates this really strong bond, even though they always seem at odds with each other. And a lot of the odds kind of comes from their viewpoint of how to handle situations. Whereas Noe seems to be very, I guess, oblivious and a little bit too trusting. Vanitas is more vindictive and he's more kind of sinister, even though he does have a good heart somewhere in there. It seems like he always comes to a good conclusion about what he wants to do. Add into that like a great cast that surrounds them. Jean, this vampire from the war who took out hundreds of vampires, who's incredibly strong, who is easily kind of thrown off her footing by Vanitas and his very, very forward romanticizing of her. Domi, who is from Noe's past, who kind of is always there to support him, but also has a strong sense about herself. You have Roland, who's from the church. He's part of the Chasters group, who basically go out and kill evil vampires, and his seemingly changes once he meets both Noe and Vanitas and sees their weird human-to-vampire relationship. And there's so many more characters to really dive into. They all have this kind of uniqueness about them, their history, their role in the story itself, and they all seem to come together with a fantastic chemistry that seems to drive the story forward. I also really appreciate the aesthetic of the show, very much 19th century Paris, A lot of really great backdrops, the visual style, the character designs themselves. The animation that Bones does in this series is fantastic. There's a lot of great animation points in the show, even though for the most part, it's not very action heavy of a show, despite it being about, powerful vampires and humans always being in odds with each other. Additionally, the story behind the characters and the world itself, I found very fascinating. Like I said, I'm not typically a fan of vampire stories themselves, but the concept of the true name of vampires, how to corrupt that, becoming the curse bearers, as well as the political structures between the vampires and the humans themselves is something that I've loved as it's kind of slowly unraveled it. Additionally, as the story went on, there was kind of emphasis on additional powers behind the vampires themselves. As we find out that Noe actually is known as the Archivist, or at least that's part of his name, but additionally, when he does drink the blood of somebody, he can actually see into their memories, into their past. And as we'll find out later on, there's actually other vampires themselves that have power within theirs as well. And this all leads into kind of the intrigue behind the characters themselves, and what really the capabilities of the story has going forward. Who is the charlatans? Who is the vampires working for? How do they keep peace between the two of them? What is the whole aspect of the curse bearers? Why does the curse bearer aspect have to be a death sentence for a vampire? Why can they not save them? Is there trust in what Vanitas is doing? The vampires themselves don't trust Vanitas, obviously, because he is taking upon himself the name of this legendary vampire that everybody despises. They all think that he's causing the curse bearers to begin with. A lot of that stuff is really interesting. And like I said, even though there's still plenty to get into, and I'm hoping that we get into a lot more of this in the second season, a lot of the driving force really still comes back to this great, fantastic cast, great visuals, great music, great themes, everything really driving it forward. It's a culmination of all these things that I really think had me really captivated by the show and just craving the next episode. So I think if you're looking for a vampire show, you're definitely not going to go wrong here. I think if you're looking for a show that's heavy action, you might be a little disappointed because the action itself is pretty limited. I think where a lot of the enjoyment comes from is going to be the characters, the chemistry, the conversations between the characters, the constant back and forth between Vanitas and Noe, the buddy cop drama that I mentioned before. I will say that there is a little bit of hesitancy here for me to mention the idea that this does have some elements of horror kind of in there. There's particularly one backstory of one character that does get pretty violent. So I will kind of mention that as a side, but it's not something they kind of set in for a long period of time. It is something that just kind of, here's a story and then moves on. But with that said, I really loved the case study of Vanitas. I do highly recommend it. I think my only kind of hesitancy that I have and that I will give is that this is technically something that is unfinished. I did feel that the last episode left me a lot to be desired, but at the same time, that is with the mindset that we will have a second season coming in January that will continue the story. And at that point, I really do hope that does come to a very climactic end for the two seasons themselves. With that said, that's my review of the case study of Vanitas. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like down below. Comment, let me know what you thought of this video. Are you going to check out the show? Have you checked it out already? What your thoughts on it? Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video if you can. Support us on Patreon if you can. We definitely appreciate all of our supporters. And y'all take care.